AI is going to change everything. We've been hearing and saying that with increasing frequency over the last 2 years. So, in today's episode of the Creative Ops podcast, we ask, what is creativity in the age of AI? You, I, we can now type and speak images, videos, and more from our imagination onto the screen faster than you can spell Leonardo da Vinci. None of us has a crystal ball. AI is a seismic disruptive force. And through today's and future discussions, we seek to chart a course through the fog of uncertainty, using questions and the conversations they spark as our compass to navigate from here to an uncertain there. What if the most groundbreaking shift in creativity isn't just about the tools we use, but the way we approach the act of creation itself? Imagine a world where creativity isn't just about artistic expression. It's a force for problem solving, a language for storytelling, and a bridge that connects us on a deeper level. So, are we on the cusp of an unprecedented era of creative empowerment, or are we risking the erosion of human creativity and indeed ingenuity? We dig into these questions and more with Alexia Adana, Director of Creative Technology and Innovation at Edelman. She is ideally suited for this conversation. What is creativity in the age of AI? She has been and is working at the intersection of art and technology. Her journey is fascinating. It spans photography, branded content, AR, 3D, and now artificial intelligence, reflecting a career built on curiosity and adaptation. She's an OpenAI Sora alpha artist, a runway creator partner, and a collaborator with Google DeepMind on educational initiatives. So she's just not working with AI, she's shaping the conversation around it, helping creators, clients, and students, the next generation of creators, find their own way through the fog of AI is going to change everything. In this episode, we purposefully set out not to provide black and white answers. We wanted to challenge ourselves and offer you our thinking out loud. We use questions as our compass, such as, is artificial intelligence simply a shortcut for churning out content? Or can it serve as a co-creator that expands the limits of human imagination? What happens when the starting point for creativity is a machine rather than a human spark? But we also flip the script, introducing a unique perspective, perhaps revolutionary. AI not as a mechanical tool, but as a creative therapist. Yes, a creative therapist, a guide that prompts us to dig deeper, refine our creative vision, and elevate our storytelling instincts and expand the canvas of how we might express our creativity. By the end of this episode, I once again promise you, you're not going to walk away with definitive answers, but more importantly, with new questions and perspectives on AI's evolving role in creativity. Perhaps you'll be thinking about how to harness AI as an ally rather than a crutch, and reflect on why storytelling and our approach to it must evolve in an era where machines can replicate and mimic, but not originate the human experience. The one question I keep coming back to is, will we use AI as a true creative partner, or will we gradually surrender our creative autonomy, our creative choices to the algorithm? That and more in my reflection segment after the conversation with Alexia. Alexia Adana, welcome to the Creative Ops podcast. I've been dying to have this conversation with you for ages. How are you today?
I'm good. I've also been dying to have this conversation. There's been a lot of upfront between us, and I think it's going to be a very lively and nuanced discussion.
Yes, lively and nuance. Nuance is certainly a good word to use in these early days of the unfolding age of AI. And you and I are going to be talking about a conversation that has to be rooted in nuance and I think uncertainty. and that is, what is creativity in the age of AI? Nobody has the answers. But before we get to that and really into the meat of the discussion, tell us a little bit about who is Alexia Adana, what's your background, and what do you do today?
Yeah, so I am an artsy fartsy creative nerd. I'm originally from Jamaica and I grew up in the States. And I've always been very curious about technology. So I was one of those kids that was coding MySpace profiles, and I was like in Broadway trouping groups. I did a little bit of theater. I was my high school's yearbook photographer. So as I kind of like grew up finding different forms of creative expression, photography really stood out to me. So I started my career in photography, and then when the DSLR came out, it democratized video and, filmmaking. So then I learned video and editing, and then worked in the marketing industry doing branded content, working in-house, working agency side. I was at RGA for a little bit, and kind of like ping-ponging back and forth between, brand side and agency side. And then when AR came out, it became this new way to really engage with people in a more immersive way. And that was really interesting to me. So then when Blender came out, that democratized, 3D and that kind of more immersive storytelling. So then I taught myself 3D. And so when AI came out, it was like, oh, I can really actually, create anything and explore whatever vision I have in my head. I no longer need, $10,000 to like, get a crew together and film something. I don't necessarily need the editing expertise just to basically create a vision and make my vision come to life. So I was lucky enough to be in some early beta groups. So Dolly 2 I got early access with, and that kind of blew my mind. And eventually kind of got hooked up with the OpenAI Sora Alpha artist group, and I'm also part of the Runway Creator Partner Program, and also partnering with Matt Lorraine at Google DeepMind to craft these mini master classes for Columbia University, and start to kind of think about integrating education so that up and coming creators who might be afraid or just don't have access to the tools are starting to understand how to integrate it because it's not going anywhere. Um, and, my whole thing is just thinking very intentionally about how we're using technology to create an impact, especially for marginalized communities. And so, yeah, that's kind of been my journey. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how to continue thinking about impact and innovation through the use of technology.
Cool. That is a jam-packed background, and there's so much in there for us to dig into as part of today's discussion. What is creativity in the age of AI? Just so that the audience is aware, today you're at Edelman. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, so I'm the director of creative technology and innovation in the US at Edelman.
Okay. Well, I can't think of many other people who are well suited to have this conversation with. So let's dive in. You've got this really rich background in all sorts of creative pursuits and outlets, starting at a really young age. Over time, technology sort of got embedded into your creative tool set. And I want to come back to the idea of democratization because I think that is a huge part of, what is creativity in the age of AI and who are the creators in the age of AI. But let's start with a really broad question. Like, do you have a definition or a sense of what creativity is in the age of AI? And and I'm asking because I don't know. I don't think there is a definition for it yet. And I don't know if there's ever really been a black and white definition of what creativity is, but let's start there.
Yeah, I think for me and my perspective is creativity is a form of expression through craft and through storytelling. And so in the age of AI, creativity is still the same. It's just a new way to create that expression.
So when you say craft and storytelling, especially that word craft, does it does that sort of like should I take from that it has to meet a certain level of quality?
No, anybody can be creative. And honestly, creativity is not just confined to the arts and to visual storytelling. When you're problem solving at work, that's using your creativity. When you're connecting the dots and trying to find some way to take a problem and turn it into a solution, you have to have some level of creativity to do that. In the art and creative world, you have, you have the art industry and you have the creative industry. But at the core of each is how to take this human-centered problem or emotion or experience and allowing the outside world to feel it and experience it through your lens. So at an art level, that's through your individual lens and, or the people that you're collaborating with. And in the creative industry, it's through, a ton of people's lenses, right? It's through the creative director's lens, the designer lens, through the client lens. And everyone's, the objective is to express some way to connect with people.
I love you're saying that that very sentiment has come up on a lot of episodes on this podcast because I agree with you. I think creativity is just an innate human trait or skill or characteristic, like a kid, painting in kindergarten class and running home and asking his mom to put it up on the fridge. Like that's creative expression. It's not about like meeting a certain standard. It's about expressing a feeling, expressing a way in which somebody sees the world and they want to engage others and they want to put others into that feeling, that view of how they're looking at the world, how they're sensing the world. And I think we've forgotten that in the business world, in the agency world over the last 10, 15 years, where everything has sort of been like creative has been more about like scale and speed versus storytelling. Or do you think I'm being a little bit harsh there?
No, I think it's definitely become more of that because at the end of the day, profit is king. And so we have found a loss of that storytelling that's really meant to connect with people and instead kind of pushing product, pushing brand awareness at the expense of necessarily creating something meaningful, because that's not necessarily the objective for advertising. It's not necessarily to create something meaningful. It's to sell a product. And so that's at the end of the day that's what happens. And so you see a dilution of the emotions and the meaning behind the story that's being told.
Yeah, I think that has definitely happened over the last 10, 15 years as sort of digital has transitioned to the epicenter of how advertising works. And there was a time where advertising was much more rooted in storytelling, in creating that connection. And it's still there. I don't want to say it's extinct, but it's certainly been overwhelmed by the trends. I'll call it, I don't even know if transactional storytelling makes sense or if that's an oxymoron. But at serving the platforms of being able to put more and more and more out there and doing it faster and faster and faster. And often the original story that most companies are founded on, most companies are originated around. As you said, that just gets diluted over time and it gets lost. And I do wonder in this time. So one of the things you and I spoke about is this idea of, and it's something I've been thinking about for a while, like AI de Bergerac. Because I do think with a lot of these creative tools, like Midjourney is probably the one that most people are familiar with because it's the one that first hit our radar. And it is magical in a way for someone like me who never had the ability or dexterity to draw or paint or master tools like Photoshop or Final Cut Pro. To me, it was magic to be able to translate my imagination into reality by typing a few words or saying a few words. And so for me, it's helped me like tap into that creative expression. I've never been able to. It's almost become like, I guess, a creative prosthetic in a way for me. But what I'm seeing a lot of right now is that a lot of organizations, whether it's agencies or in-house agencies, are taking these tools and using it as the creativity easy button to be able to scale at speed. And it sort of feels like, are we creating a scenario where these tools become like creative AI de Bergerac and they're whispering in our ears, here's the creativity you should put out into the world? And should we really still like, how do we balance that with the idea of like on the other end trying to be creative Shakespeare or creative Spielberg? So do you have like what are you seeing out there and what's your perspective on this? Are we going down that easy button path?
Yeah, a lot of companies and clients want to be the first. They want to capitalize on AI mostly so that they can, you know, come to the market in a way that's unexpected or new. And that's a big part of, trying to win awards and getting recognition. And it can be at the expense of allowing especially junior talent to hone in on their craft and their technical skills. I think to me, that's the biggest, or that's the main type of creative that is at risk of becoming a creative Shakespeare. Because if they're starting with AI, which many of them are, I've experienced art directors who, when they're creating a mock, they start in Dolly or they start in Midjourney. And I think there's not necessarily anything like objectively wrong with that. However, if they're developing their unique style and their vision starting with the machine, then I think they're at risk of really pushing their craft to a place that is authentic to them truly, because their craft is starting from a machine. It's not starting from their, pen to paper or their brain to editing software, and it gets there eventually, but it's like you're never going to be able to craft it exactly the way that you want. You're at the mercy of the machine. And so if that becomes more and more ubiquitous, we'll see again, like that diluted kind of expression. Midjourney has a very specific look. You can tell when something's been generated in Midjourney, and it continues to have, style references. And now it's starting to allow you to upload images to create a mood board. I've personally uploaded my 3D generations to create a mood board, but that's simply for me to get inspiration. I'm not going to like create something that looks like my work from the machine and then just end there. I'll take that as, oh, this is kind of inspiring me based on my own craft, based on my own vision. And so now I can take this output and kind of create something of my own. And to me, that workflow really helps creatives explore their vision in a way that would maybe take much longer than before. So to me, it's like you have this AI being integrated in the process that's actually speeding up your ability to hone in your craft. And I find that to be really exciting, that aspect.
So I heard like two paths in there. Like path number one is you could start in the AI tool, but you're using it for as you and I have both seen many organizations and teams do is ideation, inspiration. But once you've got that, and it's being prompted by your own ideas and the output you're then taking, but then still going back into the tools that you're familiar with, where you are still putting hands on the wheel and and then taking it further. And then path number two is where you're starting in the tools where you've got the hands on your wheel, and then perhaps you're taking that into the AI tools and then collaborating with them on, some of your initial drafts and things like that. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, and I even think it's more than, two ways in. There's so many different ways to integrate it. But yeah, at the core, it's are you starting with the machine or are you incorporating the machine within your process? I think the latter is where creative excellence will continue to evolve in the industry. I think the former puts the creative industry at a risk to drive innovation and to push boundaries and to get to that creative Shakespeare place.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me as listeners have often heard me say, perhaps rant on this pod. I think AI is great at scaling at speed the creative and the stories of yesterday, because that's what we created yesterday. It can learn it, it can break it down into its components, and then it can just scale it for every channel at the click of a button, so to speak. But the stories of tomorrow, that is what we create. And that the stories of tomorrow are really like shaped by or informed by what is, I think, in some ways, what we've maybe diluted about the human experience. It's about the craziness, the uniqueness, the irrational existence of just being human. I wrote this thing on LinkedIn a while ago going, AI is great at optimizing. So it's never going to stand at the bottom of Everest and say we should climb up it or we should go to the moon. But humans will go, yeah, let's climb up Everest. Let's go to the moon. Even though it's like logically, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's insane. And and so as you're talking about like craft and storytelling, I think that's what we need to focus on is sure, let's use AI to scale yesterday's stories if we need to plug them into the campaigns and scale campaigns out. But it is still our responsibility and our privilege to create the stories of tomorrow.
Yeah, that made me think, if you've ever been, and I, believe the audience will relate to this, when you're in a room brainstorming with a diverse set of individuals with a diverse set of lived experiences, when somebody says, "Oh, I saw this thing," or "That reminds me of this experience that I had," or "In my family, we do this," and you have everyone in the room bringing that to the table, you have this magic experience of coming up with something that is truly unique to whatever the brief is or whatever the problem you're trying to solve is. Um, and I really, really enjoy that experience. And if you're starting with the machine, you're not starting with those lived experiences. They might be incorporated as you continue to go down the process.
Yeah.
Um, and again, there's nothing like objectively wrong with that. I just think, to your point, the lived experiences of humans is so much more nuanced and can provide so much more emotion and so much more depth to storytelling.
Yeah, and it's because we are biological creatures. I do think AI over time might evolve into us thinking about it as its own type of species, but it will have its own sort of experience of the world. It cannot learn everything about the human experience. We ourselves don't understand everything about our own human experiences. Like we are still like evolutionarily speaking, like and mentally and psychologically speaking, infants when it comes to understanding ourselves and why we do what the things we do and the way we are and all those things. And but some way, somehow, we continue to come up with these ideas for what tomorrow can be, either individually or, as you said, especially when we're together in a room with all these diverse, like lived experiences. And that's where I feel magic comes out. And I love to, one of my favorite hacks to give to creative teams is still have the brainstorming session, like all human, but then use AI as a feedback partner. Like let it listen or give it the transcript of that brainstorming session and that discussion, that conversation, and then let it offer its perspective, either just sort of, writ large, or maybe you've configured it to act as a certain persona or role or something like that. And that sort of goes back to your idea of like, you know, how are we still driving the creative process as humans, but then leveraging, integrating AI as part of that to the benefit of the creative process.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a great example of that, and even, I'll say one of the methods that we used in the Columbia mini master class is the team developed this very long prompt for the filmmaking students. So it's MFA and MA students. And basically, it's this method where it asks you a series of questions and it's for you to answer. So it's GPT asking you so that you can flesh out your ideas. So the students come to the class with, a seed of an idea, and then they use the AI to prompt them to think that through. What is your protagonist backstory? What are their struggles? What are the environments like? And really, instead of asking GPT to do that, it's pushing them to evolve the story in their own minds. And that to me is like, that's where you get that craft-centered, human-centered storytelling. And the machine is there to like, we only have one brain. Even if you're in a room brainstorming with other creatives, like the lived experiences are at the core, but the machines and the AI and the LLMs can help you explore that in ways and depths that you might not have done before. There's been so many times when I've been using, GPT or Claude or Perplexity or whatever the LLM tool is, and I'm prompting it to ask me these questions and kind of like even having these thought-provoking back and forth. And I was like, oh, I've never thought about it that way. And then it inspires me to like approach a project in a different way. And those aha moments, while they probably would still happen in different ways if you're just kind of like brainstorming on your own and going traditionally just going on the internet and finding inspiration. But you mentioned speed earlier, the speed at which we can explore and push and like think about things differently is incredible now.
It is. And that's where we should be. You're correctly highlighting the right ways to use AI as part of the creative process, right? We can explore more ideas, we could do them more quickly. And sometimes we don't know the questions to ask ourselves. We don't know, we'll like pick an area of exploration, but then because it's human nature, we immediately sort of become blind to all the other areas of exploration around us. And as you're talking, this like one of the many reasons I love talking to you, I was flashing to this sort of image of, because the way you described it of like, oh, the AI is now prompting us to think about, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? So one, it's like that role reversal. We're not prompting it, it's prompting us. And I do think that's a very valuable way for us to think about AI in a way that most people don't use it. And it just sort of makes me think it's almost like creative therapy, a creative therapist in a way, right? Because everybody sort of gets the imagery of like going to the therapist, lying down on the couch, and all they're doing is asking you questions. And you're really answering, you're coming up with your own solutions to your problems, but they're there to prompt you with questions. So you just described like to me, you described like creative process therapy, where ChatGPT could be there to prompt the creative process by going, well, what if we explored this, or what about this? And it's also got an amazing memory. It can remember much more than we can. And they might go, well, remember last year for this campaign, what we talked about? And we don't have great memories, and it could just sort of surface that again. I love that idea of like, a creative therapist could be its role.
I love that as well. And it's funny because people actually are using GPT as
Yeah.
a mental health therapist, which there are pros and cons to that. But yeah, I think that method has been really helpful for me. And this is like a little bit not related to creative, like, I guess, marketing, but the same thinking can be applied. Is I recently had an hour-long conversation with GPT to help explain space-time. And like I learned the fundamentals of space-time in 1 hour. Like I can feel confident in just kind of describing the general notion of space-time. And then I can go back to that thread and look at the very specific things that I didn't quite grasp and just kind of like review that and, come back to it. And so let's say as a creative, you're working on a brief for, I don't know, a food brand, and they're trying to kind of demonstrate how they're doing more organic or fresh, approaches versus frozen food, etc. So imagine you have an hour conversation with GPT about farmers and how they approach, organic versus using pesticides, and just getting a knowledge about the world of a farmer. Like, tell me what the day to day is of a farmer. What are their problems? What are their goals? What are their challenges? How do they go about this? And then you have this wealth of knowledge now, which of course you want to like fact check and stuff and still kind of, do your own research, that you can now bring to this brief in a way that like may have taken you weeks in between your other projects to do. And as we know, most of the time we don't have that much time to like respond to an RFP or respond to a brief. So I think that's another really valuable way, the research phase, and developing strategy based on real data and real like external education, that it's just like very difficult to get all of that in such a small amount of time without AI.
Yeah, you're highlighting something really beneficial. I think right now, over the last 2 years since ChatGPT hit, and Midjourney and everything else, everyone's been like thinking about, AI in the creative process, really sort of the visual parts or the video parts and things like that. But there's so much more, as you and I know, in the whole creative process. There's research, it's all the conversations with the client, the internal brainstorming sessions. And and one of my recommendations whenever I'm meeting with individuals or teams is take your current process and put it to the side and reimagine what the process could be. Because like even research, like everyone is still sort of doing the almost the soul sucking work of, okay, I'm going to go pull a bunch of reports. Like somebody's going to go and like download a bunch of stuff from the internet and things like that. And then I'm going to go read all of it and I'm going to synthesize all that. And I'm going to generate like, some sort of point of view on the industry or the client and things like that. And that'll come into the internal like discussion around what are the concepts we want to pitch to the client. You learned about time and space in 1 hour, and you just described, okay, well, we could learn about the food industry or this client in a much different way now. I think in a much more fun and immersive and again like sped up or like accelerated way. And even all the conversations that are people having, it shocks me that people are not recording their meetings. Like those conversations they're having with clients, record those because there's so much gold in there. And people go, well, I take notes. And I'm like, well, most of us aren't great at taking notes and remembering everything from the meeting. record them, like pull them into then, into the process, into the research phase, the concepting phase, because ChatGPT or Claude or whatever your tool of choice is, you could give them the transcripts and they can pull that in. And then you could ask it to go like, find points of connection between the research we've done, the meetings we've had with clients, the internal brainstorming sessions we've had, and what are patterns you're noticing? What are outliers you're noticing and things like that. And I think it's just we have to think of as part of effectively leveraging AI to our benefit in the creative process, we have to also reimagine the way we work, like what we do and what we're going to use AI for, and introduce new ways of working to the entire process.
Yeah, that's a great way to approach using recorded meetings, kind of connecting multiple meetings and finding the patterns. I think when you were saying, you know, most people are bad at taking notes, jumping off of what you just said, it's like instead of trying to jot down notes and trying to like take a note while the client or somebody is speaking, it's jotting down questions to like follow up with,
Yeah,
the transcript and the AI. Like, because it's a lot of times it's a lot of conversation, and it's kind of a lot of times there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and so you can be like, remind myself to like ask about what this client said in response to this very specific thing, because the transcript's going to be super long, right? And that I think is also super valuable, because there's so many times when you're doing the brainstorm after the client feedback and you're like, I remember the client saying this one thing, but I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it was about this, but and it's like, if I had that specific question of like, okay, go back to when they were talking about this thing, but like I was trying to pay attention to the next thing, and I think that's a great way to even just pulling out exactly what they said instead of having to go through the transcript like page by page.
exactly. And I know you're at an agency or somebody at an in-house agency. At some point, there's going to be a creative brief. And again, there you could take all the conversations with the clients, internal conversations, and it would take a little bit of effort to set up the right sort of sequence of prompts, but you could turn all that into your 80% first draft creative brief, instead of like trying to again remember everything and pull everything together. And I think it would be a brief that everybody would look at and go, wow, that's pretty bang on. That's what we talked about. And it would feel like something the client and the agency or in-house agency could immediately like dock into. Okay, let's take it the last mile now and button it up. I think there's
Yeah.
so many ways in which we could leverage AI as part of the overall creative process, and not just let's use these tools to generate a bunch of images and videos and whatever else have you.
Yeah, that's just such a it's a part of the process, and it's something that most people focus on, to your point. You know, creatives think a lot of creatives think that AI equals Mid-Journey
Yeah.
and the video tools, or just like asking GPT a question. And it's like that's one of my goals, is to help creatives think, basically apply more of a methodology behind how they're using the tools. I like to tell people it's literally stream of consciousness when I use these tools. My prompts are extremely long, and I start with context. Here's the like situation that I'm in. Here's like what's going on. And here's what I'm trying to figure out. And the trying to figure out part is stream of consciousness. I'm not overthinking how I'm talking to it. I'm not really trying to edit myself as I'm typing, because I know that it needs as much detail as possible to give me what I'm looking for. And so instead of being like, come up with some ideas based on this brief, it's like, here's the brief, here's some thought starters I had, but I don't know if like this is truly within strategy. And my team and I, we were talking about this and we had a lot of like discussion around, it's like literally just throw, at the LLM everything that you possibly can. And that will result in much better outputs. And then the image video stuff is just helping to turn all of that into something that is essentially kind of a prototype. And I think that's really awesome is like now you can help clients see a lot more clearly what you have in your brain as like a starting place.
Yeah, one of the things I really like doing is I actually don't like writing prompts anymore. In fact, I've learned over time that the AI tools themselves are better at writing the prompts. But what I love doing is talking to ChatGPT and having a back and forth conversation where, again, it's sort of like this um, therapist or Socratic process where it's asking me, I've told it to ask me questions as I'm sharing like my stream of consciousness around what I'm trying to solve for, figure out, do, achieve. Um, and then based on the conversation, I will then ask ChatGPT to create the prompt or series of prompts to work through and like the workflow around it. And because it knows itself better. And I think that's a little bit of a mindset shift we all need to embrace because, and it is different. Like we never ask Excel or any other tool we're using, hey, can you help me use you better than, like, you know yourself better than I know you, Excel. Can you just do what I need you to do? It's like that's not possible. But we could do that with ChatGPT. We could go, okay, we have this conversation. Now turn it into prompts that we're going to apply to what do I want to achieve. And I think a lot of people get tripped up by prompts, and I almost think of it as a spectrum. And I often use dating analogies, so I might get into trouble here. So fair warning. But a lot of people, as you said, just put in this surface level like prompt, like, oh, can you give me some options for X? And I think that's sort of like the that's the Tinder of dating. And that's perfectly fine for I have these 10 things in my fridge. Give me a recipe. Because like you just want an answer. It's not involved. At the other end of the spectrum is I want to come up with some really good concepts for this client we're pitching, or for this campaign for this new product we're taking to market. And that should start with a long conversation because that's like that's like dating when you want to get serious about a relationship. You do actually sit down and you talk to the other human being and you go back and forth and you're asking each other questions to get to know each other. And what do you each want out of life? And are you a good match? Anyways, I'm probably stretching the dating analogy, but
It's true
um,
though. It's a good one.
yeah, I think it is. So, I think another hack for folks as they're thinking about how do I use these tools to my benefit in the creative process, talk to it. Like just talk to it. Because in our human world, when we talk to each other, we tend to solve the toughest problems in the world when we talk to each other. So, yeah, I think that's good advice.
And yeah, I totally agree. And now you have the evolution of the LLMs where you can actually share your screen and do real-time
Oh, yeah.
conversations.
Yeah.
So for me, that's really helpful when I'm learning extremely specific skills in advanced software like After Effects or Touch Designer. I'm able to use, Gemini right now has the ability to literally share your screen and just talk to it. And because it has all of this wealth of the training data, it knows the user interface. It knows like how to do very specific things. Whereas if I try to go on YouTube and find this very specific thing, I'm probably sometimes you can find it, But then what if you want to tweak that very specific thing? What if you want to turn that thing into something else? What if you want the line to wiggle at a different frequency and it requires you having an expression that's very complex? And I do think for me, that was kind of like coding MySpace profiles. I went and I looked at other people's profiles, grabbed the HTML, and then kind of tried to figure out how to make it my own thing. I wasn't starting with my own HTML and CSS because I'm not a developer, I'm not a coder, but starting from someplace at least allowed me to turn it into something of my own. And I have my idea, but I need help, crafting it in a different way. And so now the ability to do this kind of real-time conversation is really, really powerful. And so you can imagine, even if you're sharing, and there's privacy issues with this. So if you're at an agency that can afford enterprise tools, that's the big, disclaimer here. You want to protect your client's data. But even sharing a PowerPoint presentation, and just kind of having this real time, like going through it with the LLM is something that's like kind of revolutionary.
It is. It's So I'm going to be doing some of these workshops, and part of the section is one of the sections is the new laws of work and the new ways in which we need to think about working. Because um, this isn't just about scale and speed. This is about like what used to be scarce, like knowledge, scale, speed. Real-time conversations, like that's all abundant now. So we need to change the way we work. It's more a mindset shift than a technology shift, I think, is what we really need to embrace to unlock the full possibilities and through it amplify the human. We could use the machines and amplify the human, which I think has gotten diluted over the last 50 to 100 years.
Definitely.
I want to, again, I love talking to you because we end up going down all these nooks and crannies, but bringing it back to the core subject, what is creativity in the age of AI, and picking up on a couple of the threads that you've pulled on for us through this conversation. One of them is like, well, two things, and I don't know if these are related, but I'll put them out there and, feel free to, you know, approach them however makes most sense for you. One is like intentionality. We do have these tools available to us, and human nature's path of least resistance. My mom would say, "You're lazy," to me, but it's path of least resistance, and that's part of our, biology by evolution. So these tools are there, but you're telling us we need to be intentional in the way we use these tools. So it would be great to hear your perspective on like how do you approach or how do you advise like perhaps students you're working with or people on your team that are early in their career and maybe they are coming up as or they will be coming up as AI first. Like how do we how do you approach intentionality for yourself and how do you advise others to do that?
Mhm. One of the ways you have the strongest creative output and answer to a brief is a very strong why. In the design world, you can have a design that looks really good, but great design has a very intentional why. There is a methodology behind it. There is intention behind every stroke, every line. There's a reason why it's designed the way that it's designed. The colors are intentional. The typeface is intentional. Everything is intentional to achieve a certain kind of connection with the audience and represent that brand in the way that they are truly wanting to express themselves. And so that's specifically a design example, but even in, creative campaigns, you have a really strong why in terms of the strategy. Like, why are we doing this? And so I think we need to ask the same question when we're proposing AI as part of the solution. What purpose is AI serving that is necessary, that we couldn't use another tool or another approach as the answer. And that allows us to prevent putting out more shallow surface level outputs. If the why we're using AI is to be the first to use AI, maybe that's like achieving an objective of quite literally being the first. But what is the intention behind being the first? What does that mean for you? And I think if you go a little bit deeper, then even if you are just using AI, it puts more intention behind what does it mean? Like, why do we want to be the first? Why is that important to us? And so in my mind, that's like the creative work world, is asking ourselves why we are using it. And so one thing that we built internally, we do these internal innovation sprints. So we're proactively building tools that we think are solving problems in a way that we couldn't otherwise do without the use of technology. And so we built this prototype. It's an AI-powered story building framework where we take a public domain story and we allow particularly parents to put their child as the center and become the hero of the story. And this was particularly designed for marginalized communities because in our research, we found that especially like first generation kids, they're not reading as much. They're not relating to the stories. The parents are not relating to the stories. So they're having a harder time reading to their kids. And so if we can take Alice in Wonderland and use GPT to create a starting place of an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, where the Alice is Jennifer from Barbados, and the elements of, instead of the rabbit, maybe it's Jennifer's favorite toy. And so you're able to adapt the story page by page in the framework. And then we use GPT vision to take a picture of that kid and turn it into a cartoon character. And then you go page by page and you're able to adapt all of these different elements of the story to be more authentic to that kid so that they can really see themselves as the hero and the center of these stories. And so the intention behind that was, how can we help kids who don't see themselves in, the world's most popular stories, so that they have an eagerness to actually read these stories and feel like they're a part of culture. And yeah, that was one of my favorite prototypes that we've built, because it feels like it has actual like real world impact.
So that goes back to emotional resonance. And that's the purpose of storytelling. It's always been the purpose of storytelling because emotional resonance moves the world. Well, it moves the world. Ideally, it moves the world forward in a positive way, but sometimes we know that isn't always true. But we're emotionally driven creatures. And that's why, so, and we use the word nuance at the top of the conversation. That leads me to this so it's not really about the AI, is it? It's not about the machines. It's about us and how we are using the machines. Are we using it simply to scale its speed? Which might make sense for, let's say bottom of the funnel transactional marketing or transactional, again, I'll say transactional storytelling, even though that sounds like an oxymoron. And is it fine to use it for the easy button for that sort of creative? Maybe even creative's not the right word anymore for that. It's just more scaled marketing at speed, and AI can allow us to do that at scale, at speed, and cost efficiently. But the further we go up, sort of the marketing funnel, or really the storytelling funnel, where it's more like blank canvas, where we are trying to create those new origin stories, those new stories of tomorrow break through the noise of all this commoditized marketing content and create that emotional connection to spur people to do something that we think they need to do, that we want them to do. Their AI should be leveraged more as a creative partner, as a tool versus the easy button. So it's not the machine, it's us. We have to be the ones we have to monitor ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And I think the creative industry also needs to advocate for themselves. And, with social media, we see like we're at the mercy of the algorithm. You've
Yeah.
seen creatives change their style or approach the way that they shoot photography, or the way that, you have people literally crafting their stuff for a square format. And now, you know, now it's not square. It's 4x5 or 2x3 or whatever it is. And you have all these people who are like, why did Instagram change? It's totally ruined my feed. And it's like, if you're creating for the algorithm or for the platform, then you're doing yourself a disservice. You're not creating for yourself. And of course, you have your style, your vision, and you are doing that. But like being dictated by an algorithm is harmful for the creative industry. And so even with these major AI tech companies, like if we're not asking ourselves what we need from them and just kind of going along with like how we're just kind of expected to use it because that's just how they're, you know, this is just how you have to use it. And we're not kind of having a more impactful dialogue with like, actually, I really need this from your tool to really help me expand my creative output or my creative vision. And so one thing that I think is necessary as this industry evolves are tools that are integrated into a pipeline. So imagine, and Adobe's kind of starting to do this, right? They've kind of previewed this as part of their enterprise offerings. And honestly, Adobe has a lot of features that I think are in line with all of this stuff that we're talking about. So imagine, you're working on a project, you have all this footage that you've shot, but there's this one clip and it's just like you went on location, you spent a bunch of money, and it's like a B-roll shot, but it's just not quite right. Imagine if you, in that pipeline, you're in Premiere, you can generate an AI video that achieves that B-roll shot that you can't afford to go out and reshoot, um, and you're supplementing your existing footage and your existing storytelling with something that's going to allow you to complete the project within the budget. I think that's amazing. Also, when you're talking about low-hanging fruit, let's think about e-commerce, right? Um, Having to shoot things in a studio, like every single angle, and just only getting the version of that for e-commerce. Like you said, what if we can put those pictures of sneakers in other environments and be able to scale the use of that? So now, with Adobe as an enterprise tool, you can train a custom model. You can take all of those product shots of the sneaker from every angle, and now you can place that sneaker in different environments, and you can put it in different worlds, and you can play, you can really like expand the storytelling around that sneaker. But it started with real photos in a studio of that product. And that kind of low-hanging e-commerce use of I think is also great. um yeah, so there's a lot of ways to go about it, to your point, from low-hanging fruit where AI is kind of relied more heavily to take out some of the more, not only mundane tasks. Like think about it as like the batch tool in Photoshop, resizing and adding a watermark to like 100 images instead of you having to like manually do that. now you can take this e-commerce product of a sneaker and put it and kind of almost automate it being in all these different types of environments. So that's kind of how I see what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think again, none of us has a crystal ball, but I think the world we are going to be moving towards, as all these capabilities start to get more reliable, and as we start to not just adopt them but adapt them to our creative processes and the way we work, is I see that there's going to be like almost two meta creative workflows. There's going to be the storytelling one that is always like focused more on how do we tell the stories of tomorrow to create the emotional connections that we need. And those stories will then get plugged into the scale creative workflow, which is about taking the stories and then going, okay, how do we scale those stories at speed? How do we personalize them? To your earlier example of how do we put these kids into these um, fairy tale stories so it feels like it's their story? And because I think what we've been doing over the last 10, 20 years is that the the scale workflow has really sort of drowned storytelling. And what we're going to need now is storytelling is going to become more important than ever before, because you and I have seen the data. Audiences are increasingly tuning out the content that's being put out there because it's been driven by scale and speed and surface level personalization. So I think storytelling is coming back to the fore. And with these tools, I I think that we're also going to start to see, I think, different types of creatives. Like today, a creative is a creative is a creative. But I think what we're going to have to need is, I think there's going to be creative engineers that work in the scale creative workflow world. And I think there's going to be storytellers. And those storytellers to me would have been the people that 3,000 years ago would have gathered you, me, and the 10 other people in the village around the campfire and told stories of yesterday and today, and more importantly, stories of what tomorrow could be. So I think we're going to have these two worlds. AI will be there. And to your point, AI will be heavily used by the creative engineers for scale creative, and AI will be used as a partner for the storyteller creators. But that's like directionally, that's the world I think we're starting to move towards.
That's the ideal world.
Yeah, it is.
And there are a lot of creative professionals that are of the mindset that even at the top of the funnel, people are just going to rely on 100% AI generated storytelling.
They
And
are.
I think we will see that, unfortunately.
They are. And maybe I'm being Pollyannish myself and too much of a glass half full kind of guy, but I can't help myself. But I, I think those that don't let the storytellers, like the true human storytellers that have always walked amongst us and still walk amongst us today, if they don't give them the ability to still be the storytellers, where do the stories of tomorrow come from? Where do the possibilities of tomorrow come from? Like we are story driven creatures. Like you and I are sitting here. You're in New York, I'm in Phoenix. We're talking through a screen using, like, all of this is just the culmination of a whole bunch of stories. And stories are just the stories to me are the original algorithms. And it's a series of stories that got told over time that got turned into possibilities that crazy people went out and did. Um, so we still need the storytellers, either for like our species as a whole, individual societies, or individual companies. Like, and especially in this time of AI, the one thing I keep telling everyone is our whole history as a species, we innovate, we then copy, and then commoditize, which forces us to innovate. AI basically allows us to put that on a hyperloop. So stories are going to matter more than ever before. Stories to like, prompt us to create like new innovations and new value. So we can still remain relevant as professionals, teams, organizations, industries, and society. So to me, storytellers are more valuable than ever before. But anyways, I'll get down off my soapbox now.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. And as you were talking, I thought of Snow Crash. Have you read Snow Crash?
I have not read Snow Crash. Tell me about it.
So I thought of both Sapiens and Snow Crash. So
Love Sapiens.
Sapiens,
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. And, the whole premise is what you're talking about, right? Human evolution skyrocketed once we started having the ability to tell stories.
Yep.
And it goes into the very early, examples of what that storytelling was and how it started getting even more accelerated as societies became bigger. And then Snow Crash takes that and essentially the Babylonian society had these, you know, rules of society, right? Like all of these kind of early societies, they have these rules that are based on myths and stories, right? And Snow Crash takes it to a next level and essentially turns those ancient civilization rules into exactly what you said, an algorithm. And um, essentially the language of these rules. So like making rice or cultivating, that is an algorithm.
Yep.
And so in Snow Crash, they use I think it's Namshub is what they call it, to pass that algorithm onto others. And you can only pass the algorithm of making rice through this algorithm. And super fascinating, like adaptation of human history. But that story, Snow Crash, was the first story to develop the notion of the metaverse. And so now you have like these major tech companies being inspired by Snow Crash
Yeah.
as a story, as a concept, and turning that into reality. And so I love the kind of full circle, starting from ancient history, coming up with stories that drive society, and then you have other storytellers that adapt the evolution of human storytelling into new stories that then leads to new evolution of technology. It's kind of fascinating to kind of track those points of inspiration and storytelling.
Yeah. And I think every organization, every human being, all 8 billion of us here today, all 100 billion that walked here before, we are all storytelling machines. And, you know, everyone listening to this is a professional. They've got a career, they work in an organization. As a professional, as a team leader, as an organization, those are all just different like packaging of storytelling machines. Story matters, has always mattered, matters today, and will matter tomorrow because when we run out of stories is when we run out of tomorrow. And I don't think that's what the future holds. Again, maybe I'm too much of an optimist, but I think storytelling is going to matter more than ever before. I think we should be leveraging AI to, as you gave some amazing examples of leveraging it to help us tell the stories and create the possibilities of tomorrow. Like even those kids that you put into the stories, them being in those stories and them being able to read about their story in that way created a whole different worldview for them. Um, and what are the possibilities they're going to create for themselves? And through those possibilities, what are the possibilities that will be created for others? And that's why I think story matters so much. I think we should be using AI like a mule for transactional creative. And we should be using it as a thinking partner for storytelling and storytellers. I think storytellers are going to be they're once again going to be the people at the center of the conversation. Um, but we'll see what happens. I don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, that's why education is so important. It's so important
It
to
is.
start educating young people in high school and middle school, even if they're not like, oh, I want to be an artist or a creator, just helping them learn how this technology enables them to experience life in a way that feels authentic to them, whether it is through creative expression or whether it is to connecting them with their passions, whatever it is, like these tools are allowing us, enabling us to tap into our lived experiences and put that out into the world that's in a meaningful way for us. So yeah, I'm really passionate about education because if for me, like I wouldn't be where I'm at unless my mom invested in putting me in art classes and putting me in this Broadway trouping group and like allowing me to explore my artistic side, which I'm an artist. So she noticed that and she was like, okay, I'm going to invest in like allowing her to explore that and express herself. And if I didn't have that opportunity, maybe I would not have felt as confident as I grew up to explore that. I've met so many people who are in, more traditional roles like, a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant and they're like, I wish I could like do this creative thing, I wish I in another world I was a writer, in another world I did, this. And I think that's totally fine for people to have traditional jobs. At the same time, if they had an experience as a kid or a young adult, even to have the freedom to express themselves in that way, maybe they would be writing. They might still have that traditional job, but like maybe they're uh expressing that through a hobby, and I hear a lot of people that are just kind of like even afraid to tap into that side of them. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a career, but at least the ability to explore that.
Yeah. No, and well, I think that's a good place to end off today's discussion. As we promised the listeners at the top, we don't have the answer as to what creativity is in the age of AI. It's all evolving very quickly, but we touched on a lot of things today. There's a couple of some really good nuggets in here around how to sort of think about maybe start asking, or we should all be asking ourselves questions around what is creativity in the age of AI. Um, is it all of our jobs, all of our responsibilities, the value of storytelling? Some good ways about thinking of using AI as a thinking partner. Love the idea of like the creativity therapist, getting AI to prompt us instead of the other way around, which is one of my favorite ways of using it. So why don't we leave it there? And Alexia, we're definitely going to have you back for some follow-up conversations because what is creativity in the age of AI is a question that's going to be out there for quite a while, and things are evolving very, very quickly. And the one thing I'm going to be thinking about, and this will probably show up in the reflection segment that I record a couple of days afterwards, is I'm thinking this is less about the machines and more about us and how we think about using these machines and all these new possibilities and capabilities. And it's really about what do we want our tomorrow to be and why.
100%. Yeah. When we have this conversation in a year from now, it's going to be completely different.
It will be. The technology will be different. I wonder if we will be. And again, I think I do wonder if it's going to be less about the machines and more about us.
I hope so.
Yeah. All
But
right.
yeah, thank you for having me. And this was a great discussion and one that I hope we continue to have.
We definitely will. Thanks so much, Alexia.
Thank you.
Hey folks, Nish back for the reflection question segment. For those of you that haven't listened before, this is where I share some of my thoughts a day or two after the conversation with my guest. These questions sort of help me um, think back on the conversation, put it into perspective, and in by formulating these questions, turn the conversation and my listening mode into thinking mode. Hopefully, it does the same for you. Take these questions, think about them yourself, use it to prompt a discussion with your team, with your peers, with your leadership. Um, I usually only share 3 to 5 questions, even though there's usually a list of 15 to 30 that comes out of each one of these interviews. All right. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to start with the question that I ended my introduction on to this episode, which is: will we use AI as a true creative partner, or will we gradually surrender our creative choices, our creative autonomy to the algorithms? And I think ultimately, I've been thinking about that. And I think it's up to us. It's like all technology. We build this technology and then we determine how are we going to use it. Um, there's this book I read recently called Wise Animals. Highly recommend it. And sort of one of the underlying meta narratives in it is we build technology, but in turn, technology sculpts us, and it sculpts us through the decisions as to how we adopt technology and how we adapt with those technologies. Who do we become as individuals, as groups, as organizations, as these technologies come into our environments? And this is both in our professional and our personal lives. So I think with any technology, are we going to choose the easy button, or when it comes to creativity, or are we going to understand the long-term value of continuing to invest into human-driven creativity? And by saying that, I'm not saying it's a black and white decision as to whether or not we use AI, but it's like, how are we going to use it? When are we going to use it? Why is a question we should always be asking. Why am I using AI at this point in my creative process? And how am I going to use it? What am I ultimately trying to achieve? And again, like rarely is any decision black and white. I believe of that of life in general. So if I did want to take sort of a black and white and a bit of a snarky approach and not be nuanced, is unnuanced a word? I don't think so. I could say, oh, if you're using AI in your creative process, it's sort of like taking Ozempic. And we know out there right now, people are sort of like bashing on others taking Ozempic as the easy button. But Ozempic has value, it has its place. In somebody getting healthier. And I also do believe, and this conversation for me reinforced it, AI's got its place, but we've all got to figure that out for ourselves of what AI's place is in the creative process. One of the things I've been thinking about is like, maybe this goes back to what type of creative is it? Or maybe in a business context, for what part of the funnel is this? We all understand the funnel, top of funnel, bottom of funnel, middle of funnel. Maybe for bottom of funnel, where it's like, I think of it as more like transactional creative that you're producing at scale, at speed to increasingly plug into and distribute through digital networks. Maybe that's where AI does the heavy lifting with, especially with more and more creative automation platforms coming online. Tools like Pencil, Creatopy, others. Maybe at top of funnel is where it's more like true storytelling. And to tell those stories of tomorrow, to break through the commoditized noise of what we find at the bottom of the funnel, maybe that's where AI is more of a partner, more of the servant to the human creator, if you will. And bottom of funnel, we let AI lead a little bit more because it's more algorithm driven, more data driven. So that's something I've been thinking about. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, I think, we're up to like 38 episodes now. We're finally starting to get into a weekly rhythm. But if you've been listening to this for a while, you've heard me talk about like scale versus storytelling workflows. And I think a lot of this comes back to that. So that's one question and some of the thoughts around it I've been thinking about. And that sort of dovetails into some of the other questions that came up for me is, um, one is, what are the biggest risks in allowing AI to automate aspects of the creative process? I think we need to be talking about that because we are seeing more and more of these really good creative automation platforms being adopted and organizations adapting their workflows to them. And they've got lots of incredible benefits, I think, especially at bottom of funnel. I think the risk is, do we allow it to, traverse across the entire funnel? Does it become does creative automation sort of become the Ozempic substitute for storytelling, for human creativity? Because I believe, and again, if you've been listening to this for a while, you've heard me talk about, I think AI is great at automating and optimizing the stories of yesterday, but it's the humans, because of the very fact that we are irrational, that we are all unique, all 8 billion of us on this planet, and all 100 billion that walked here before us. It is because of that uniqueness, that irrationality, that those things that, from a spreadsheet point of view, make us flawed. That is where tomorrow's stories come from. So I do think we need to be thinking about, as AI does come in, and it already is, it will only expand its footprint and its influence. We have to be asking the question, what are the biggest risks in allowing AI to automate aspects of the creative process? That has to be part of the decision making process. Today, the decision making process is around, can it produce on brand? How much more quickly can it produce content? Um, how quickly can we scale? And how much money do we save? Those are all valid and relevant questions to be asking, but you also need to be asking about the risks. Just like if you went into the doctor's office and the doctor said, I think you should take Ozempic. Cool. Why? And what are the risks? You need to know that. The same thing with AI. And I guess I keep talking about Ozempic. Maybe I'm thinking about AI as like, in the creative process. Um, it's got its place, just like Ozempic does in our in certain people's like health routines. But you got to ask why, and towards what end. The next question that I've got here that I want to talk a little bit about is, what KPIs should creative ops professionals track to ensure AI is enhancing and not replacing or diminishing human creativity? Because I believe human creativity is key to create the stories of tomorrow. And I think we need to be asking ourselves, okay, how do we actually track that? It could be a feeling, but is there some way to quantitatively track that? And like, human creativity is such a squishy term, right? Like, how do you measure it? How do you put that on a spreadsheet? I think if we thought about it long enough and if we talked about this, I think we could figure a way out. And whenever somebody says, well, you can't put a value on that, I always think that, well, Coca-Cola and other brands actually have a financial value that is on the balance sheet of those organizations, because at some point, a few smart folks got together and they figured out how to put a financial value on brand, which also seems squishy and ambiguous, and how do you actually put a number on that? But they figured it out. But I think we need to be, and this is all these questions I'm going to go through are all sort of related to each other. But I think we need to be thinking about, like, what are the KPIs that we should be tracking to ensure that we're using AI in a way that is enhancing the creative process and human creativity. Um, I don't think we want to create an environment where that creativity goes away, because And this sort of goes to my next couple of questions. It's one is, and I guess this is targeted towards the creative ops professionals, also, your creative technologists, or use this to prompt a discussion with them, is what are the biggest blind spots in AI driven creative workflows, and how can we address them? And this sort of goes back to those creative automation tools, which again, I think are fantastic and have a very valuable role to play. I think their role is to like automate a lot of that transactional creative at the bottom of the funnel to free up the storytellers, the creatives to, spend more time on coming up with and designing and creating the stories of tomorrow. And I, but again, this sort of goes back to something I was talking about earlier is we need to make sure as we introduce AI that we are not allowing ourselves to be consumed by the blind spots that, we are, taking we're picking the easy low hanging fruit around scale, speed, cost efficiency. And over time, we are basically by using the ability of AI to scale at speed, that we're going to be optimizing towards a commoditized destination for the creative that we're putting out for your individual brand and collectively. And all we're going to do is create a sea of sameness. I think to a certain extent that has sort of happened increasingly over the last 10 years. Like everything sort of looks and feels and sounds the same. And it's in all forms of creative, right? Like music, movies. It's just sort of a paint by numbers process. And we've certainly seen that in advertising. And the incentives have been there to do that. But the data's been showing up over the last few years that audiences are increasingly tuning that out. And our only answer has been to, well, throw more at them. And hopefully, eventually, something will stick because they saw it 8 times, 20 times, 50 times, 100 times. I actually think, and you've heard me talk about this before, I think storytelling is the answer. It's the antidote. So we have to do both. We have to do scale that eventually will trend towards like a commoditized sameness. And that is why we need those new stories, those stories of tomorrow that the crazy, irrational human storytellers come up with, because those are the new stories that can break through the noise. They're the bat signals that can break through the fog and once again connect with and create that emotion with the audience, and get them to act and to do something that we desire them to think, feel, do, say. And eventually tomorrow's story will then get, you know, taken by the AIs and scaled at speed and cost efficiently, and it'll get commoditized. And that will create the need for another story. This has always been the case. I just think storytelling has sort of been forgotten over the last 10, 15 years. But I think it's coming back. I think if David Ogilvy were alive today, I do wonder if he would say, I love AI because it's going to create so much commoditized sameness that storytelling is going to be the only way through. And that art of storytelling through words, through images, through video, whatever it might be, is going to once again reign supreme and be as important as it once was. Maybe we're going back to sort of like the Mad Men era, not the social norms, more like, the great copy and things like that. So I think that's something we need to think about is like, what are the blind spots? And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier is like, what are the risks? What are the KPIs to ensure that AI is enhancing and not diminishing and drowning and making extinct human driven creativity and storytelling? And And I think the final thing I'll end on is this whole episode, between Alexia and I sort of got started. She and I had an offline conversation, and I shared with her something I've been thinking about, and it's Cyrano de Bergerac. So you're probably familiar with the play. Cyrano whispers into the ear of Christian, who's a very handsome man, but not very good with words. And God, I can't remember the young woman's name that he was trying to court. But you know, Cyrano tells Christian what to tell to the woman. Was her name Ophelia? Can't remember. Anyways, um, and I shared with Alexia, I was like, well, if these AI tools are really good at mimicking, copying, remixing the images, video, stories of yesterday, then yeah, it's very attractive for us to be able to type or say a few words and then all of a sudden an image or a video comes to life. But are we basically Christian and Cyrano is the one sort of whispering? And does our creativity get too heavily influenced by what the AI knows about yesterday, as opposed to us truly making our what we see in our minds, making our imagination of that visual or moving visual expression come to life? So it's like, are we using AI in creative work to enhance our originality, or will it subtly sort of like influence and homogenize artistic expression, individual artistic expression? Because what it knows is yesterday. It doesn't have the irrationality. It doesn't have the unique lived human experience of you, me, all 8 billion of us, to create the images and the videos and the stories of tomorrow that is based on our unique experience, on our irrationality. So is and Alexi and I talk a lot about this in the episode. Are we going to use it in a Cyrano de Bergerac way, or are we going to use it more as we talked about in the episode, a creative therapist to push us to like take our creative expression further, to expand it, to go deeper, to you know um, offer up prompts. I really like that part of the episode where it was like we think about prompting the AIs to come up with the answer. And maybe we should be increasingly thinking about the AIs prompting us, that it is a creative therapist. And just like a therapist doesn't give you the answers, it just asks you, that therapist asks you questions, because you've already got the answers. So in the same way, we've already got that creative expression inside of us. We all have it. It's an innate human quality. We're all born with it. Now, I'm not saying we're all Michelangelo or Leonardo da Vinci, but we've all got creative expression inside of us. We just have to find the medium through which to express that. And should we prioritize, whether it's in our personal lives and especially in our professional lives, prioritizing using AI as a creative therapist to prompt us to truly bring our ideas, our imagination to life. So I'm going to end there. Hope that was valuable in terms of reflection questions, and I will catch you next time.